Before we dive into the hidden corridors of America's most secretive base, let me ask you something that might change how you see everything that follows. What if the real secret of Area 51 isn't what's inside the hangars, but what the decades of silence taught the government about controlling information in the modern age? What if every leak, every whistleblower, every mysterious light in the Nevada sky has been part of a larger pattern that's still unfolding today? By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Area 51 matters less for what it might contain and more for what it reveals about the nature of official secrecy in an age that demands transparency. Stay with me, because the truth isn't what you think, and it's far more relevant to your life today than you might imagine.
Let's start with something that seems simple, but opens up everything else. Why does geography matter when we talk about keeping secrets? The answer lies in understanding how physical space creates informational voids, and nowhere demonstrates this better than the deliberate selection of Groom Lake, Nevada. When the government chose this location in the 1950s, they weren't just looking for an isolated airfield. They were engineering the perfect environment for what we might call controlled invisibility. Think about what makes a secret truly secret. It's not just about locked doors or classified stamps on documents. It's about creating layers of inaccessibility that make verification nearly impossible for outsiders. Groom Lake offered something unique in the continental United States. The dry lake bed itself provides a naturally flat surface large enough to land virtually anything, and I mean anything. Unlike conventional runways with their predictable orientations and standard widths, this expanse of hardened clay could accommodate objects of unusual dimensions or flight profiles. The flexibility this provides cannot be overstated when you're testing technology that doesn't conform to established engineering principles. But the lakebed is only the beginning. The surrounding mountain ranges create natural walls that block sightlines from almost every direction. This isn't accidental terrain. It's a geological fortress that was recognized and exploited. From the few vantage points that do exist, you're looking at a facility from miles away through heat distortion and atmospheric interference. What you can see is determined entirely by what they choose to move in daylight hours, and that choice is always deliberate. The airspace designation known as R4808 North completes the isolation. This restricted zone means no civilian aircraft, no commercial flights, not even most military planes can enter without explicit authorization. The sky above Groom Lake is owned, controlled, and monitored with the same intensity as the ground below. When something flies in that space, it flies because someone with extraordinary clearance decided it would fly. And they decided no one unauthorized would see it.
This geographic isolation created something unprecedented in modern intelligence operations. It created a space where the normal rules of verification simply don't apply. Journalists can't visit, cameras mounted on civilian aircraft can't photograph it. Even satellites have their limitations, and the base's security forces have decades of experience in timing activities to avoid overhead passes from foreign reconnaissance systems. What we're really looking at here is the weaponization of distance and terrain. Every mile between the base and the nearest public land is a layer of defense, not against physical intrusion, but against information escape. This model, perfected at Groom Lake, has influenced how secure facilities are designed worldwide. The lesson learned was clear. If you want to keep a secret in the modern age, you don't just classify documents, you make the secret physically unreachable. Now, let's examine something that seems contradictory at first, but reveals a sophisticated strategy once you understand it. For more than 50 years, the United States government maintained that Area 51 did not exist. Not that it was classified, not that they couldn't discuss it, but that it simply wasn't real. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. This was policy. And understanding why it worked for so long tells us everything about how modern information control operates. The strategy of total denial creates a unique problem for anyone trying to investigate or report on something. When officials refuse to acknowledge the existence of a facility, they effectively remove it from the realm of legitimate discourse. Journalists who report on a place the government says doesn't exist can be dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Documents that reference the facility can be blacked out or denied in their entirety under the logic that confirming or denying would reveal classified information. This approach had a curious psychological effect on public perception. On one hand, the denial fueled speculation and gave credibility to increasingly exotic theories about what might be hidden there. On the other hand, it made serious investigation nearly impossible because there was no official framework within which to ask questions. You can't file a Freedom of Information Act request about a place that officially doesn't exist. You can't sue for environmental impact studies on a facility the government won't admit to operating. The Cold War provided perfect cover for this strategy. During those decades, the American public was conditioned to accept that some things must remain secret for national security. The development of reconnaissance aircraft like the U-2 and the A-12 Oxcart required absolute secrecy because even the existence of such capabilities would alter the strategic balance with the Soviet Union. The government's argument was sound. If our adversaries know what we can do, they'll develop countermeasures. Therefore, silence serves the national interest. But here's where it gets interesting. That same secrecy infrastructure, built for entirely legitimate Cold War purposes, created the perfect conditions for hiding other things as well. Once you have a facility that officially doesn't exist, staffed by people bound by lifelong secrecy agreements, operating in a geographic void where verification is impossible, you can theoretically hide anything there. The spy plane programs provided both the justification and the cover. When the CIA finally acknowledged Area 51's existence in 2013, the documents they released told only part of the story. They confirmed what aviation historians had long known about the U-2 and A-12 programs. They provided some historical context and declassified photographs of aircraft from decades past. But notice what they didn't address. There was no mention of anything from the 1980s onward, no discussion of ongoing operations, no acknowledgement of the exotic sightings that had fueled decades of speculation. This partial disclosure is itself revealing. By admitting the facility exists and explaining its Cold War role, officials could appear transparent while still maintaining operational security around everything that matters. They essentially traded historical secrets that no longer mattered for continued silence on current activities. The public got an answer, just not the answer to the questions that actually matter today. This pattern of calculated disclosure has become a template for how governments handle controversial topics. You acknowledge enough to seem credible, you explain enough to provide plausible cover, but you never confirm the specifics that would actually resolve the core mysteries. It's a sophisticated form of information management that satisfies the surface demand for transparency while preserving the deeper layers of secrecy. Let's turn now to one of the most fascinating aspects of the Area 51 story, and it's something that reveals fundamental truths about how classified information leaks in the modern era. Over the decades, numerous individuals have come forward claiming inside knowledge of exotic programs at the facility. These whistleblowers have described everything from unconventional aircraft to recovered materials to biological specimens. Yet despite the volume and consistency of some claims, definitive proof has never emerged. Understanding why tells us something profound about the nature of compartmented security. Consider the structure of highly classified programs. Workers are assigned to specific tasks within specific zones. They are briefed only on what they need to know for their immediate function. They don't see the larger picture, and they're not supposed to. An engineer analyzing a material's properties might never know whether that material comes from an experimental alloy developed in a lab or something recovered from elsewhere. A security guard might glimpse an unusual shape under a tarp, but have no context for what they're seeing and no authority to ask questions. This compartmentalization creates a curious effect on testimony. When someone speaks out about what they've seen, they can only describe their small piece of the puzzle. They might have seen something genuinely unusual, but without the broader context, their account remains fragmentary and impossible to verify independently. They can't produce documents because they never had access to them. They can't provide photographs because cameras are forbidden in secure areas. They can't even describe the location with precision because they were transported there with blacked-out windows. The most famous case illustrating this dynamic is Bob Lazar, who emerged in the late 1980s with claims of working on alien propulsion systems at a facility near Area 51. His story included specific technical details, descriptions of craft, and even the prediction of a then unsynthesized element that would later be confirmed to exist. Yet records of his employment and education proved difficult or impossible to verify. Critics argued this proved he was fabricating everything. Supporters suggested his records were deliberately erased to discredit him.
What's fascinating isn't whether Lazar was telling the truth. What's fascinating is that the structure of classified programs makes his story functionally unverifiable either way. If he worked on compartmented projects, there might legitimately be no records he could produce. The security apparatus is designed specifically to prevent the kind of evidence that would prove such claims. This creates a perfect catch-22. The very nature of deep classification means that credible whistleblowers can't provide credible evidence. This has profound implications for public discourse about classified programs. It means we exist in a permanent state of uncertainty, where claims cannot be definitively proven or disproven. The compartmented structure ensures that no single whistleblower can reveal enough to compromise the larger operation, even if they wanted to. At the same time, the public can never fully dismiss such claims because the secrecy itself prevents verification. Consider what this means for accountability in democratic societies. If programs exist that are so compartmented that even participants can't fully understand or prove what they're part of, how does public oversight function? The traditional mechanisms of democratic accountability, transparency, freedom of information, investigative journalism, all break down in the face of perfect compartmentalization. You end up with a system where significant government activities might be occurring entirely outside the normal frameworks of public knowledge or consent. The Area 51 whistleblower phenomenon also reveals something about how information leaks are managed. When someone comes forward with claims about classified programs, the response isn't typically to threaten or silence them directly. Instead, their credibility is quietly undermined. Questions are raised about their background, their credentials, their mental state. The claims themselves are never directly addressed, but the person making them becomes the story, instead of what they're claiming. This is a sophisticated form of information control. By shifting focus from the content of the claim to the reliability of the claimant, authorities can neutralize whistleblowers without ever confirming or denying what they've said. It's especially effective because it doesn't require lying or active suppression. It simply requires raising reasonable doubts about whether this particular person should be believed. What we're left with is a persistent testimony that can neither be confirmed nor dismissed. Former workers speak of unusual craft, exotic materials, and procedures that don't match conventional aerospace engineering. Their accounts often share common elements, even when the witnesses have no connection to each other. Yet none of this testimony crosses the threshold into proof. It remains in the realm of plausible but unverifiable claims, which is exactly where the security apparatus is designed to keep it.
There's an argument that gets made repeatedly when discussing Area 51, and on the surface it seems entirely reasonable. Every strange sighting, every unusual craft, every exotic claim can be explained by the base's documented history of testing revolutionary aircraft decades ahead of public knowledge. The U-2 flew higher than anything else in the 1950s. The A-12 Oxcart reached speeds exceeding Mach 3. The F-117 Nighthawk introduced operational stealth technology. All of these were tested at Groom Lake, and all of them, when first flown, would have seemed otherworldly to observers who didn't know what they were seeing. This explanation is powerful because it's grounded in verified history. We know for certain that Area 51 has been the testing ground for aircraft that redefined what was thought possible. We know the facility has successfully kept revolutionary programs secret for years or even decades. We know that advanced prototypes, when glimpsed by untrained observers, can easily be mistaken for something they're not. All of this is true, and all of it provides plausible cover for any unusual sighting. But here's where we need to think more carefully. The spy plane explanation works perfectly for a certain category of observations: unusual shapes in the sky, high speeds, strange flight profiles. All of these can be attributed to classified aerospace programs without requiring any exotic explanation. However, this explanation starts to strain when we consider the specific characteristics described in the most compelling accounts. Consider the reports of craft performing right-angle turns at high velocity. Modern physics tells us that such maneuvers would subject anything inside to lethal G-forces. No human pilot could survive them, and no drone made with conventional materials and propulsion could execute them without tearing apart. These aren't just fast turns. These are instantaneous changes in direction that violate our understanding of inertia and structural integrity. Or consider the accounts of completely silent propulsion. Yes, stealth technology can reduce radar signatures and muffle engine noise. But we're talking about reports of large objects hovering or moving with zero audible sound, even at close range. This goes beyond noise reduction into something that doesn't match any known propulsion system, because every method of generating thrust that we understand produces some detectable sound, especially at the power levels required for flight. Then there are the descriptions of craft with no visible means of propulsion. No engines, no exhaust ports, no intakes, no control surfaces. Just smooth, seamless hulls that somehow achieve powered flight. While it's possible such designs exist in classified programs, they would represent such a fundamental departure from conventional aerospace engineering that they'd constitute a revolution in physics, not just an incremental advance. The spy plane explanation also struggles with the timeline. The most revolutionary aircraft tested at Area 51 were products of the 1950s through the 1980s. Since then, what has been tested there? We know the facility continues to expand. We know it remains highly active. We know that new structures appear in satellite imagery, but we don't know what's being tested. And interestingly, the leaks and sightings have continued well past the era of those famous spy planes. If Area 51 were simply testing the next generation of conventional aircraft, you'd expect the characteristics reported by observers to evolve gradually, reflecting incremental improvements in speed, stealth, and maneuverability. Instead, the reports from recent decades describe capabilities that seem disconnected from the logical progression of aerospace technology. This suggests that either human engineering has made leaps that vastly exceed public understanding, or that something else is being tested alongside conventional programs. There's another aspect worth considering. The spy plane programs, while secret, still operated within the bounds of known physics. The U-2 flew high, but it was still an airplane with wings, engines, and fuel. The A-12 went fast, but it did so through brute force ramjet propulsion and carefully designed aerodynamics. These were engineering triumphs, but they were comprehensible extensions of existing technology. What some observers describe goes beyond extension into something categorically different. None of this disproves the spy plane explanation for many sightings. In fact, it's likely that the majority of unusual observations around Area 51 can be explained by classified but conventional aerospace programs. The facility's primary function has always been testing advanced aircraft, and that function continues. But the explanation doesn't neatly account for everything, and the gaps are significant enough that they deserve consideration rather than dismissal. What we're really dealing with is a spectrum. At one end are sightings that almost certainly represent known aircraft in unusual conditions or angles. At the other end are accounts describing capabilities that, if accurate, would require either revolutionary breakthroughs in human engineering or something else entirely. The question isn't whether conventional programs explain some of the mystery. The question is whether they explain all of it.
Let's shift our focus now to something equally important as what might be inside Area 51. Let's examine the ecosystem of information that has grown up around it, because this reveals something crucial about how modern myths, both true and false, propagate and sustain themselves in the digital age. Around any highly classified facility, you get layers of information with varying degrees of reliability. At the core, you have the official statements, which for decades were non-existent and now remain minimal. Then you have the testimony of alleged insiders, ranging from careful, measured accounts to wild exaggerations. You have the observations of dedicated watchers who spend time at the periphery, documenting lights and movements in the night sky. You have journalists and researchers who compile and analyze all this information, trying to separate signal from noise. And finally, you have the popular culture that takes all of this and amplifies it, distorts it, and feeds it back into the ecosystem. This information ecosystem has some fascinating properties. First, it's self-sustaining. The secrecy itself generates curiosity, which generates investigation, which generates more claims and theories, which generates more interest. The loop feeds itself without requiring any actual mysteries to exist. Even if Area 51 contained nothing more exotic than the next generation of reconnaissance drones, the secrecy around those drones would be enough to keep speculation alive indefinitely. Second, the ecosystem is remarkably resistant to verification or falsification. When official denials come, they're dismissed as exactly what you'd expect if there was something to hide. When no evidence emerges, that's explained by the effectiveness of the security apparatus. When compelling evidence does appear, it's often ambiguous enough that both believers and skeptics can interpret it as supporting their position. This creates a stable equilibrium where the debate continues perpetually without resolution. Third, the ecosystem has evolved sophisticated sorting mechanisms. Within the community of researchers and enthusiasts, there's a spectrum of credulity. Some accept almost any claim at face value. Others are highly skeptical, demanding multiple sources and verifiable details before giving credence to any story. Most fall somewhere in between. And this diversity of approaches means that the ecosystem can absorb almost any new information without collapsing. Wild claims get dismissed by the skeptical wing, but energize the believers. Mundane explanations satisfy the skeptics, but get questioned by those seeking deeper mysteries. What's particularly interesting is how this ecosystem interacts with official secrecy. The government's long refusal to acknowledge Area 51 actually strengthened the mythology rather than containing it. When something is officially denied, it becomes more intriguing, not less. The denial itself becomes evidence for those predisposed to believe there's something being hidden. This is a curious paradox of information control. Sometimes the attempt to keep something secret draws more attention to it than a policy of limited disclosure would. The 2013 acknowledgment of Area 51's existence provides a case study in how official information gets processed within this ecosystem. Skeptics pointed to it as proof that there was nothing more to the story than Cold War spy planes. Believers argued it was a limited hangout, a technique where you reveal some truth to distract from deeper secrets. Both interpretations found audiences, and the debate continued, essentially unchanged. This brings us to something rarely discussed, but critically important. In this ecosystem, truth becomes almost secondary to narrative coherence. What matters isn't whether a claim is true, but whether it fits into a broader story that makes sense to the people evaluating it. For believers, claims about recovered craft fit into a narrative of government cover-ups and hidden technological revolutions. For skeptics, every claim fits into a narrative of misidentification, exaggeration, and the power of suggestion. The digital age has turbocharged this ecosystem. Information that once would have taken years to spread through magazines and conference circuits now travels globally in hours. Claims can be fact-checked instantly, but those fact checks can also be questioned and dismissed just as quickly. Video evidence can be analyzed frame by frame, but the same technology that allows analysis also allows increasingly sophisticated fabrication. We've reached a point where both genuine evidence and sophisticated fakes are almost indistinguishable to the average observer. What does all this mean for understanding what's actually happening at Area 51? It means we're swimming in a sea of information where the genuine signals, if they exist, are increasingly difficult to separate from the noise. The ecosystem has become so complex, so self-referential, so capable of generating its own content that it almost doesn't matter what the underlying reality is. The mythology has achieved a kind of independence from the facts that originally gave birth to it. This isn't unique to Area 51, by the way. We see similar patterns around any topic that combines genuine secrecy with public fascination. The Kennedy assassination, the origins of certain intelligence programs, advances in military technology. All of these generate information ecosystems that sustain themselves regardless of what new facts emerge. The lesson here is that once such an ecosystem is established, it becomes almost impossible to resolve the questions at its core through normal means of investigation and disclosure.
Now we're going to zoom out and look at something bigger than any individual claim about Area 51. We're going to examine what the entire phenomenon reveals about the evolution of government transparency, information control, and public trust in the modern era. The Area 51 story spans roughly 7 decades, from the early Cold War through the present digital age. During that time, the relationship between governments and their citizens regarding classified information has undergone profound transformation. In the 1950s, there was broad public acceptance that some things must remain secret for national security. By the 21st century, there's widespread skepticism about official claims and an expectation of transparency that would have seemed naive to earlier generations. Area 51 sits at the intersection of these changes. It's a Cold War relic that was designed for an era when secrecy was easier to maintain and more broadly accepted. But it has persisted into an age of satellite surveillance, digital communication, and a public that expects answers. The tensions this creates are revealing. Consider how the nature of secrets has changed. In the 1950s, keeping a program like the U-2 classified was relatively straightforward. The testing was done at a remote location. The number of people involved was limited. Foreign intelligence services had limited means of surveillance. Even domestic journalists had little ability to monitor activities in the Nevada desert. Under these conditions, maintaining operational security was challenging but achievable. Today, the landscape is completely different. Commercial satellite imagery can show details of any ground facility. Flight tracking systems can monitor aircraft movements. Social media allows witnesses to instantly share observations with global audiences. Former employees can communicate anonymously with journalists through encrypted channels. In this environment, keeping secrets of the type that Area 51 was designed to protect becomes exponentially more difficult. Yet the facility continues to operate, continues to expand, and continues to maintain a level of secrecy that seems almost anachronistic in the digital age. How is this possible? The answer reveals something important about the evolution of security practices. Modern secrecy doesn't rely solely on physical isolation and document classification. It relies on information management, on shaping narratives, on strategic disclosure and denial, on compartmentalization so complete that no single leak can compromise the whole. This brings us to a question that deserves serious consideration. Given the difficulty of maintaining complete secrecy in the modern era, would it even be possible to hide something as significant as recovered extraterrestrial technology? The honest answer is that it would be extraordinarily challenging. Such a program would require facilities, personnel, resources, and coordination on a massive scale. It would generate records, require funding, involve contractors and subcontractors, and ultimately touch the lives of hundreds or thousands of people over decades.
Yet, we have historical examples of large-scale classified programs that were successfully kept secret for extended periods. The Manhattan Project involved tens of thousands of people and multiple facilities, yet maintained operational security through the war. The development of stealth technology remained classified for years, despite involving multiple aircraft programs and defense contractors. More recently, the NSA's surveillance programs described in the Snowden leaks operated for years with most of the public unaware of their scope. So while maintaining perfect secrecy about something truly extraordinary would be difficult, it's not impossible, especially if the program is sufficiently compartmented and if there's institutional will to maintain the secrecy. The question then becomes not whether such secrecy is possible, but whether it's probable. Are we more likely dealing with incrementally advanced aerospace programs that are classified but ultimately conventional? Or are we looking at something that would fundamentally alter our understanding of reality if revealed? This is where the Area 51 story connects to broader questions about disclosure that are playing out in real time. In recent years, we've seen a remarkable shift in how the U.S. government discusses unidentified aerial phenomena. Former intelligence officials have testified to Congress about encounters with objects displaying characteristics that defy conventional explanation. The Pentagon has released videos of such encounters. There's been a subtle but unmistakable change in tone from dismissal to acknowledgment that some observations remain genuinely unexplained. Area 51 exists within this larger context. Whatever is or isn't at that facility, it's part of a broader pattern of military and intelligence encounters with unconventional aerial phenomena. The question isn't just what's in the Nevada desert. The question is what these various data points, when taken together, tell us about how much we don't know and how much has been kept from public view. There's a final aspect of this deeper pattern worth considering, and it's perhaps the most important one. The Area 51 phenomenon has fundamentally shaped how the public thinks about government secrecy and official explanations. For millions of people, Area 51 represents proof that the government lies, that official denials can't be trusted, that there are layers of reality hidden from public view. Whether or not anything exotic is actually hidden there almost doesn't matter. The cultural impact of the secrecy itself has been profound. This erosion of trust has consequences far beyond UFO research. When people believe they've been systematically lied to about one topic, they become more skeptical about official statements on other topics. The perceived cover-up at Area 51 feeds into broader conspiracy theories about government deception, and some of those theories are far less grounded in reality than questions about classified aerospace programs. In this sense, the secrecy itself, regardless of what it's protecting, has had negative externalities for public discourse and democratic governance.
As we come to the end of this exploration, let's think about what comes next. Area 51 continues to operate, continues to expand, and shows no signs of becoming less secretive. But the environment in which it operates is changing rapidly, and those changes will shape what's possible for classified programs into decades ahead. The technology of surveillance continues to advance. Commercial satellite capabilities that were once the exclusive domain of superpowers are now available to private companies and even individuals. Hyperspectral imaging can detect things that normal photography misses. Synthetic aperture radar can see through clouds and darkness.
In the coming years, it will become increasingly difficult to hide physical activities at any location, no matter how remote. This puts facilities like Area 51 in an interesting position. If keeping activities secret from aerial observation becomes impossible, the nature of what can be tested there will have to change. Underground facilities become more important. Timing activities to avoid satellite passes becomes more sophisticated. Or perhaps the strategy shifts to hiding things in plain sight, conducting tests that can be observed but not understood by those watching. We're also seeing the emergence of new technologies that might render some traditional secrecy measures obsolete. Artificial intelligence systems are already being used to analyze satellite imagery, finding patterns and anomalies that human analysts would miss. Quantum sensors could potentially detect unusual energy signatures or materials from great distances. The information environment continues to become more transparent, whether security services want it to or not. At the same time, public pressure for disclosure about unidentified aerial phenomena is building. Congressional hearings that would have been unthinkable a decade ago are now happening with increasing frequency. Former military and intelligence personnel are speaking more openly about encounters that remain unexplained. There's a growing sense that the old model of blanket denial and classification may be unsustainable in the face of accumulating evidence and public demand for answers. This creates an interesting dynamic. If there are genuine mysteries related to Area 51 or similar facilities, the pressure to disclose is increasing, while the technical ability to maintain secrecy is decreasing. Something has to give. Either we'll see carefully managed disclosure of information that has been classified for decades, or we'll see increased efforts to explain away anomalies using conventional theories, even when those theories strain credulity. There's also the question of what secrets from the Area 51 era might already be obsolete. Technology that was revolutionary in the 1950s or even the 1980s might have limited relevance today. If recovered exotic materials or craft did exist and were studied there, it's entirely possible that the most sensitive work has long since moved to other facilities unknown to the public. Area 51 might continue as an active testing ground while no longer being the repository of the most significant secrets. This would actually align with how intelligence operations typically evolve. As a location becomes known and attracts attention, the most sensitive operations gradually migrate elsewhere. The known facility continues to operate, providing cover and misdirection, while the truly classified work happens at sites that haven't entered public consciousness. If this pattern holds, the real equivalents of Area 51 today are places we've never heard of, located in regions we wouldn't think to watch. But here's what makes this all so fascinating and so relevant to everyone, not just those interested in UFOs or classified programs. The Area 51 story is ultimately about power, about who gets to know what, and about the relationship between governments and the citizens they serve. In democracies, we operate on the principle that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed. But how can that consent be meaningful if significant government activities occur entirely outside public knowledge or oversight?
This is the core tension that Area 51 represents. There are legitimate reasons for some government secrecy. National security sometimes does require that capabilities and methods remain classified. But where is the line between necessary secrecy and excessive secrecy that undermines democratic accountability? Who gets to decide where that line falls? And how can the public even evaluate whether the line has been drawn appropriately when they don't know what's being kept secret? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have simple answers, but they're questions that matter profoundly in an age where technology is advancing rapidly, where new capabilities are being developed constantly, and where the decisions made in classified programs could have implications for all of humanity. The right balance between secrecy and transparency is one of the defining challenges of modern governance. So what should you take away from this deep dive into Area 51 and everything it represents? First, understand that the facility is real,
that it has been and continues to be used for testing advanced aerospace technology, and that the secrecy surrounding it is genuine and serves legitimate purposes. Second, recognize that the same secrecy that protects necessary programs also creates perfect conditions for hiding other things, whether those things are advanced human technology or something more exotic. Third, appreciate that we live in an era where the old models of maintaining secrets are breaking down, but new forms of information control are emerging to replace them. Most importantly, understand that the Area 51 story is ongoing. The debates about what's hidden there, the questions about government transparency, the push and pull between secrecy and disclosure, all of this continues to evolve. We may be approaching a moment of significant revelation, or we may be entering a new era of more sophisticated secrecy. Either way, paying attention to how these dynamics unfold tells us something essential about the world we live in and the future we're heading toward. The desert in Nevada holds its secrets still, the hangars remain closed, the guards still patrol the perimeter, the restricted airspace remains off limits. But the questions persist, growing more sophisticated as our tools for investigation improve. Whatever the truth may be about what's hidden at Area 51, the search for that truth reveals as much about ourselves, our institutions, and our moment in history as it does about the secrets themselves. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. The Area 51 phenomenon matters not because of what might be in those hangars, but because of what it shows us about transparency, trust, power, and the price we pay for secrecy in a democracy. As long as that facility remains operational and closed to public view, as long as the questions remain unanswered, and as long as people continue to look to the Nevada sky hoping for a glimpse of the extraordinary, Area 51 will remain what it has always been, a mirror reflecting our deepest questions about what we know, what we're told, and what might still be hidden in the spaces between. Thank you for taking this journey with me into the architecture of modern secrecy. The truth, whatever it may be, is still out there, somewhere beyond those fences in the desert.